module, you'll hear from Todd Langager, Director of Implementation, Improvement, and Impact with the Learning and Leadership Services Division. Todd will provide an overview of the role and importance of evaluation in grant-funded projects. You may want to keep a notepad nearby as you are bound to pick up several key ideas and strategies to support your work.
Okay, well, welcome, Todd. If you don't mind, if you could please just tell us your name, your title, and how long you have been working with grant-funded program evaluations.
So my name is Todd Langager, and my title is Director of Implementation, Improvement, and Impact. And I've actually been working to lead and support grant-funded program evaluations for about 6 or 7 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So what has been your role as an evaluator in working with grants?
So in my role as an evaluator, I'm really responsible for developing a plan to collect data or evidence to answer specific questions about the implementation of grant-funded activities, as well as the impact of those activities on specific outcomes. And so, for example, like I collect data that might tell a district or a school or a program staff, like how many teachers have been trained on some sort of topic or strategy. I also might collect data on how many teachers are using that strategy in their classroom, and even the degree to which that strategy might be impacting student behavior or student achievement. And so, as a part of that plan, the evaluation plan, I may design surveys, conduct classroom observations, lead focus groups, or just compile, different sorts of assessment attendance data and things like that. And so I'd say that's one of the kind of the key roles that I play as an evaluator. The other piece of that is that in addition to collecting data, I'm also usually very responsible for both analyzing, summarizing, and sharing this information with really the key educational partners in the grant. And so those partners might be people like the program director or the coordinator, the participating districts and schools and their leadership teams, as well as like the grant funder, whether it's the U.S. Department of Education or the California Department of Education. And so as an evaluator, I take all of that information, we try to make sense of it, and then we may put it into something like an annual report to the federal or state government. We may make presentations to school boards and to different audiences, or it might be as simple as just putting together a chart or a graph that tells a story or provides some actionable information to program staff that helps them make important decisions.
Wow. So you probably have a pretty full plate most days, I'm guessing. When we meet with grant teams, of course, as you know, sometimes the funder will require an external evaluator. Sometimes we have different options, but there's always a lot of considerations that the team will take into account when deciding which ways to go. So in general, when you're thinking about creating an evaluation plan, what are some characteristics of a well-designed evaluation plan?
So first and foremost, I think that an evaluation plan needs to be driven by key questions, right? Often people think that it's all just about the data, but really it's the questions that really inform the data that we need to collect. And so we often start with, what questions do we need to answer for the grant funder? Often the federal government or the state government with that grant have specific questions that we do need to answer. And so we build the evaluation plan around that. But really, even more importantly, we also ask, folks like the program staff, the program director, what do they want to know? What do they want to learn about this program or this set of activities? And so, really from there, we start with those questions to begin building out that plan. In addition to questions, an evaluation plan needs to look at both implementation and outcomes. And so all programs have key activities or actions, things that they do, right? Like professional development or training, maybe coaching, tutoring, the use of a curriculum. And so an evaluation plan needs to collect evidence on whether or not these activities happened, right? Did everyone get trained? How much coaching occurred? Was the curriculum used with fidelity? Which kids got tutoring and for how much? And so as an evaluator, we have to collect that sort of information, right? Because that helps us answer critical questions. But then we also have to look at, the program goals, right? And those outcomes. All programs have something that they're trying to achieve, right? And results that they're trying to produce. And so we have to collect data around whether or not those changes are happening, right? Changes in knowledge, understanding, attitudes, behavior, student achievement. And so these changes then often take, a good bit of time before we may see these results. Sometimes it's in the short term, 6 to 12 months. Other times it takes longer, like 2 to 4 years over the course of the entire grant. And so that evaluation plan needs to be constantly kind of shifting and evolving over time. And so that we're first looking at those implementation activities and eventually moving to short-term outcomes, and then eventually looking at long-term outcomes and answering the question, did this program accomplish its goals? The third piece that I think is really important for an evaluation plan is it has to include multiple measures, right? An evaluation question shouldn't just be answered by one data source or by one single piece of evidence, right? A good plan should have multiple measures that includes both quantitative and qualitative information, because this really provides everyone with a more complete picture of what is happening within the grant and what is and isn't working well, right? And then lastly, I think an evaluation plan needs to be like a living document, right? Because an evaluation itself is really an ongoing kind of continuous process throughout the grant life cycle. There's often a misconception that you do an evaluation at the end of a program and that it's always about reporting back about what did and didn't happen, right? But really a high quality evaluation shifts its focus and occurs throughout, the life cycle of a program. And so meaning that we collect data on the front end on those implementation of those key activities, and we're sharing it back with program staff and educational partners immediately so that they can use that information to make improvements and adjustments to program activities and to make sure that things stay on track, right, or on timeline. Otherwise, an evaluation is really just nothing more than like an autopsy, where we're reporting on things that we can't really do anything about anymore. And so I guess I'd say lastly, an evaluation plan does need, it's a living document, needs to be flexible, right? Coming here out of the pandemic and the craziness of the last couple of years, life is always throwing us curveballs. And so the best designed evaluation plan needs to be flexible enough to shift gears and to adapt to kind of changing circumstances on the ground. And so that we can answer the questions that are most important to the people that are running the program as well as in the field.
There's so much in what you just shared that really resonates with a couple professional learning opportunities that we've had lately. As you may know, Grant Services is part of the COE GPN, Grant Professionals Network. And one of our colleagues from Orange County encouraged everyone to think of the metaphor of the Reese's peanut butter cup with grants and evaluation, that they go together from the beginning to the end. And also something that struck me when you were talking about the flexibility and the responsiveness and completing work along the way is through their equitable evaluation webinar AEA series that they put on. Is one thing that resonated with me was one of the presenters said, feedback at every stage can promote equity. And I think that's really, those are really important concepts to hold on. And I love your metaphor, maybe grim, of the autopsy at the end, but you get it. That really makes sense. So thank you for that. So now that we're talking about, being mindful of evaluation throughout the life cycle of the grant. So, what are some tools or strategies you can share to help grant managers keep an evaluation plan on track and keep it living?
Mhm. I'd say there's two things that come to mind. Is first and foremost, having regular meetings and check-ins with your program evaluator. So that program evaluation, that team is in regular communication with program staff, right? Those regular touch points both allow opportunities for the evaluator to share that real-time feedback and information on things that they're learning and collecting information upon, as well as for program staff to also share more real-time kind of formative questions that are popping up along the way. I think all of us within the work, we run up against barriers and challenges. And so an evaluation plan, when the two entities, the Reese's peanut butter cup come together, right? It really does provide that opportunity for both of those two parties to work together to kind of figure out how we're going to collect this information, how we need to adjust timelines. The evaluator can push back preliminary results and preliminary analyses that the program staff is able to use to kind of gauge progress and adjust course real time versus waiting until the end of a project year or a couple months down the road. They can make some of those real time adjustments. And so I think just not really a strategy, but a regular standing meeting between the evaluation staff and program staff is a super critical thing to make that plan a living kind of breathing document. The other tool that I think is really just the foundation for all of this work, both from like a program standpoint, program planning standpoint, but also evaluation planning standpoint, is a program logic model. And so if you've ever seen one of these things, it's a bit of a complicated kind of visual diagram, if you will, of everything that goes into a program, right? And so typically those are organized into the categories of inputs, right? Like what resources, money, people, physical items, things like curriculum, technology go into a specific program. Then what are those key actions or activities? Things like training, professional development, tutoring, math or reading interventions, right? Like those are those key activities. Then there's outputs, kind of what gets produced from those activities that we can measure, or we can touch or quantify. And then it maps out like what changes we would expect to see over time, often into short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And so oftentimes we work with program directors, upon, the acceptance of the grant award, to build out a logic model that is a visual representation of everything that's going on over the course of the life of a grant program. And again, that document itself is also a living document, but it's one that once we get a clear understanding of what is expected to happen over the course of the life cycle of the program, as well as what changes we might expect to see along the way, we as evaluators are able to really anchor in the data collection activities to that logic model, because we know what are the things that we expect to happen or that are going to happen. How can we collect evidence and artifacts that demonstrate whether that activity did occur and to what degree of fidelity? But then we can also put in place data collection tools and systems that allow us to collect information on the results and the changes in student attitudes or in teacher beliefs or in teacher practices, and all the way down the road until student achievement results and attendance patterns and things like that. And so I find that the longer, the more that logic model is really at the center of a conversation, and that it is both clearly understood by all parties involved in a grant, that in itself is a really powerful tool to ensure that The evaluation is closely tied to the key things that are happening in a grant program, and that are able to also then answer critical questions that go right back to the key activities and the key things that the program is trying to accomplish.
So that was an excellent tip. Building understanding of logic models, even if one wasn't a requirement in the initial application. I'm hearing you say that the logic model can be just a great way to make sure everybody's on the same page with understanding the bigger picture of everything that is being done in this work, in this grant. So in addition to the wonderful tips that you've shared earlier, do you have what are some recommendations for our colleagues or for district staff who may want to learn a little bit more about the best way to develop and deliver a high quality program evaluation?
Well, I mean, two things come to mind. First, I would say, reach out to the evaluation team here at SDCOE. We are a small but mighty team, and we are always interested in talking with people about program evaluations. And really a big chunk of our work is around building the capacity of others to engage in this work, because we recognize that all of us have questions about the effectiveness of the impact of the things that we're doing. And if we can actually build the capacity of everyone to engage in this sort of type of, thinking work and like data collection work, it's going to really make all of our programs and services much more powerful. And so we have in the past and we continue to offer different trainings and services that are geared towards helping people understand, how do you create a logic model, right? How do you build out an evaluation plan? Or diving into some of the specifics of the different data collection techniques and tools, whether it's, designing a survey or conducting a focus group or running a classroom observation. Those are all things that we have a lot of experience in, and we'd be more than happy to sit down with you on a one-on-one to do a consultation, or get you plugged into one of our, ongoing kind of training series and cycles that might be able to support folks in doing this work themselves. The other thing that I'd recommend is as you mentioned, there's a lot of great resources out there on the web. And so whether it's the American Evaluation Association, the California Educational Research Association, CERA, they have an annual conference every year in California. It's typically up in Disneyland. Those sorts of places do ongoing workshops and annual conferences throughout the year. They also have a pretty big web presence where there are resources that you can access online, sometimes for free, other times for members, that would really go a long ways in terms of deepening your own knowledge and your capacity to develop an evaluation, design data collection systems, and things like that. And so those would be my recommendations.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I brought up the COE GPN network earlier, and I have to say that the SDCOE small but mighty team has been mentioned, and only in great and impressive light, several times amongst our colleagues. So kudos to you. It's nice to hear that brought up without asking. And so when you look back at your experience with working with grants, what would you say, what has been your biggest challenge in working with grants?
I think the biggest challenge sometimes is that the way sometimes we envision a program working, or the way it's described in the grant application or narrative, doesn't always match up with the way that the program actually works or operates, right? Is that in sometimes there can be a bit of a disconnect, right, between, the grant writer and say maybe the program director, right? That maybe they have different understandings or expectations of, how this program will actually work. But then in addition to that, program staff sometimes don't always have the clearest understanding of the conditions on the ground, right? And so then these folks that are out in districts and schools, they have, intimate knowledge of their local context. They may have resource, human, and time constraints that are not always made aware to kind of the program directors and coordinators. And so trying to get all of that, everybody on the same page, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes can be really challenging, right? Is that, within a grant, the funder, either the federal or the state government, have expectations about, things that need to occur. There's often maybe been things outlined in a grant narrative or proposal about what will happen at expected timelines. And then when the work begins, we run up into just the messy real world, right? And sometimes those expectations and constraints get in the way, or people's understandings of what this work involves or looks like may be slightly different. And so we end up spending, often some time, not just us as the evaluator, often program staff do as well, of just working to get clarity of like, what really are we trying to accomplish here, and what are those key activities? Because for us, we just really need to work from a common starting point around, what do we expect to occur over, the next 3, 4, 5 years of this grant, and what changes would we expect to see? And so that can be a frustration, as if folks are not all on the same page when that work kind of begins.
Understandable. Well, on the flip side, what has been your greatest joy in working with grants?
I find a ton of joy in being able to help people answer, important questions about the work that they do, right? I think that we all want to know that what we're doing is working and having its intended effect on students and the schools that we serve. And so, we all want to believe that what we're doing in our jobs, in our daily lives, that it's making a difference. And I think we also want to know how we can get better at what we do. And I think the great part about being an evaluator is I get to help people answer those questions. Like, I collect evidence and data that provides them information around the things that they do and the goals that they're hoping to accomplish. And I believe that as a part of my work, I can give them greater confidence in what they do and how they can improve. And for me, that's a huge source of satisfaction when I know that I can bring some joy to other people's jobs and their lives and the work that they do, knowing that that it's having an impact.
Well, thank you so much, Todd, for sharing your time, sharing your expertise, and for everything that you do in support of our students.